Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brand new AF chat. I haven't done these in a while. I've done a bunch of standalones, but I'm here to talk about something pretty interesting that kind of just happened last week. And I have a guest that I wanted to have on the show for a long time, John, who I've known for a while. And I have not had a chance to either be on your show or for you to be on mine until today.
I'm aware. I'm aware.
So it's finally happening. It's 2024. I guess new things. So we're going to talk about something really interesting today. But before we kickstart that, as always, let me know what's in your cup and where you are from. I'm back to drinking Earl Grey tea. Boring, I know, but I like it. And I'm here in New York, which is kind of cold and kind of not cold. Depends on the time of day. How about you, John? What's in your cup?
What's in my cup is my tea from yesterday,
Oh, beautiful.
which is, I'm not drinking it. This is early in the morning. It's leftover. This happens to be green tea. So in the afternoon, I'll have green tea, which is my morning is Earl Grey. Yeah, Twinings Earl Grey.
Yep.
And it's old fashioned, but I love it. And it's all good. And I got my first Earl Grey from the actual original Twinings store in the city in London.
Oh, really?
And the
Wow.
original store, which was bombed out in World War II in the Blitz
Oh,
when
wow.
London was partially demolished, is literally about this wide. And it goes back like I don't know, almost 50 meters or something like that. It's so narrow and so long because taxes when it was originally built, something like 300 years ago, were based on how wide you were.
Oh, wow. That explains most of New York, if that was the case here too.
Exactly. Exactly.
Wow, yeah, that sounds like fun. I've been drinking Twinings tea for who knows how long, and then a few months ago I switched to green tea, and I
Uh,
liked it, and then I continue now drinking both.
yeah, that's me too. I always hated it, but hey, I thought antioxidants, whatever, I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I come off of like extremely black espresso. That used to be
Uh,
my thing. And last year I
okay.
decided it was time to stop with the espresso. We'll be fine, and switched over. Well, I've been drinking tea forever, so just more tea.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that's great. Ooh, we have people in Prague. That's nice. Water in
Awesome.
Latvia.
Love Chrome.
Hello from Turkey. Hello from France. All right, we're rolling. International again. So, this is very international on the show. And there's always someone from a country who should probably be asleep right now. But they're here with us because we have very interesting topics. Very
Yes.
interesting topics. Clearly, I ran out of words very early in the day. That'll happen.
Yeah, it's
So
all good.
I think we should kick this off. I see the numbers are looking good. Ooh, hello from Austria. Hello, Austria.
Awesome.
Not quite to go
Awesome.
to sleep, but still.
No.
So let's kick this off. Hello, John. I'll let you introduce yourself. So you can do the honors. You do so many things. I don't even know where to start. So the floor is yours.
Hey, everybody, super pumped to be here. We're talking about App Store, app marketplaces, and all the things that Apple's done, the DMA, Digital Markets Act, all the implications of that is going to be awesome. So I am a senior contributor at Forbes. I also do the Tech First podcast, which is more on what I call smart matter. I do the Growth Masterminds podcast, which is on growth marketing. I do that for Singular, and I do a lot of consulting for Singular as their VP of Insight. Singular, of course, is an MMP, a measurement platform. And all this stuff is super, super interesting. We're seeing so much change right now in mobile. It's unbelievable. We've had the privacy revolution on iOS. It's coming on Android. Digital Markets Act, which is shaking everything up, but that's happening globally. We're
Hmm.
seeing that in the US. We're seeing it with the Epic lawsuit. We're seeing all kinds of stuff happen. Korea, Japan, other places. Wow, we are in a fascinating space to be in tech and business, and it's only getting more interesting.
Absolutely. I think you summed it all up. You intro this whole show.
You're
This
welcome.
whole yeah.
Invoice in the mail.
Thank you. Well, that's the pleasure of hosting people who also have shows, so you know how this works. But
Yep.
definitely interesting. I think so. Initially, when I saw the news, I was like, "Ah, no one's gonna. This doesn't make any sense. This is crazy." And then I started reading the details, and I went, "Yeah, this is really crazy. It's legitimately like certifiable, crazy. And then I started running the numbers and looking at all the little details, and I see people actually doing this. So I figured we'll jump on here and try to talk about what this means and is this a good thing? And in my mind, there's a good side to this, there's a bad side to this, and there's an ugly side to this. Depends who you are and depends how much money you make and how your apps work. But just for the brief overview of what we're looking at, the high level, the where we get started, and feel free to ask questions in the chat as we talk about this because this is such a weird, complicated topic. The high level is Apple has been forced to allow sideloading. Instead of saying, sure, we're going to go Android, they said we're going to set up the concept of app marketplaces. And an app marketplace is a third-party store that is separate from the App Store. That sounds good, that works. They made it so that it's very safe, and App Store and marketplaces use the App Store to find discovery, so that's also kind of nice. You download an app from your regular built-in App Store, you get an App Store, a marketplace. And there are fees. There's some fees, not all fees. But in addition to that, they lower the fees if you want to stay in the App Store from 30% to 20%, really 17% potentially, and from 15% to 10%. So it sounds pretty lucrative. So this is the good. Now, there's more stuff outside of the App Stores. There's browser support. There's streaming games. I think that's secondary to all of this in my mind. But all this is exciting. I'm going to pay less as a developer. I'm going to be able to go into more of these marketplaces so I, in theory, can get more discovery. And I'm going to just make more money. That sounds good to me. So that's where all this started. How do you see the good side of everything that's happening, John?
The good side is there's an introduction of more competition. And that's, of course, somewhat artificial because it's introduced by regulation. But you mentioned the lower fees.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you don't choose to do something like this, go on a third-party app marketplace or choose your own payment provider or anything like that, you're winning to some extent. And if you do choose to go on an app marketplace or use your own third-party payments, there is a space in which you can actually win. And that space is if you maybe a casino game, something like that,
Mm-hmm.
maybe some kind of high value subscription, a Calm or something like that. If you make more than $5 per user per year, and I'm not talking per paying user, per user, because every install costs now
Yeah.
with this technology platform fee. If you make more than $5 per user per year, you can come out ahead. There's a big caveat there, and we talked about it before we went live. The big caveat is, will your conversion rate be the same as it is in the App Store? And there's a couple other hoops that are going through there. And also, if you're on a third-party app marketplace, discovery is probably not going to be quite where it was as well. So there's a lot to get into. There's way more complexity here, but Apple just released more than we've ever seen. This is the biggest change to iOS that we've ever seen, frankly.
Yeah, by far the biggest change the App Store will ever see, if it happens. We still don't know that this is going to happen. We still have a whole month. Regulators have to approve this. May or may not get approved because it doesn't really do what the law requires it to do. I mean, it does and it doesn't. But that's the good. And I mean, it sounds great from a developer standpoint. I've been working with developers for almost 15 years. I've been a developer for so long. So yeah, more discovery, less fees, happiness. But there's a bad side to it. And the bad side is the core technology fee, the platform fee, the royalty, as I've been calling it over the last few days. So in addition to the 17 or 20% fee, and we'll talk about why that is in a little bit, you have to pay Apple €0.50 for every download. Every download, regardless of which store it's going through, a marketplace that is a third party, the App Store through normal App Store, you always have to pay Apple €0.50 in addition to the 20%. And that changes things.
After the first million installs, yes.
Okay. You jumped the gun on me. So
sorry.
Yeah, I was building up. No, so there is a little bit of good, and that's right. So defining a download is actually easily defined by someone got your app from the App Store. But Apple made this whole thing about first annual download. So the app has to be downloaded in a span of 12 months, which means every 12 months, it renews. It's a moving window. So what Apple did was they said, we'll take the first million for everyone, with one exception. We'll take the first million, and those are on us. They're on the house. You pay for them with your membership, your annual
The
membership.
first hit is free.
Exactly. That's exactly. We'll get to why this in the ugly section, because we're just in the bad section right now. But that's a half of euro for every download beyond a million. And a lot of apps might not have a million apps right now, or a million downloads, I should say. But they will eventually, because this number will continue to accrue over time. There's one exception, and that is app marketplaces, which are the app stores that also have an app in the App Store. They don't get this sort of waiver, so they're paying for everyone. And this is going to be, I think, a crucial why some companies are not going to do it. In just a little bit, we'll talk about why. But so there's this now royalty fee on every download. That's insane. I've never heard of anything like this. I've never seen anything like this, especially not in our industry. In other industries, those are crazy. If you watch Shark Tank, you know that everything is a royalty, and if you're giving someone money, you want that money back. But Apple doesn't really do that. So that throws a wrench into everything. And I imagine that goes into the calculation of $5 per user, which is really $5 in essence per download, kind of in perpetuity. Because, and we're edging into ugly now, this is going to be charged on updates as well and reinstalls, which is crazy. So your one user that you acquired in year one, if you continue to provide updates to them for a whole year, you only pay the one time, but then come day 366, they will become a new annual install again. And this is where it gets interesting. So, yeah, I mean, exactly. It's one of those, why would anyone do this? So maybe in year one you save money. And I actually ran the numbers for ChatGPT. So if ChatGPT was to take its last 12 months, just its last 12 months, and it didn't actually make money for several of those 12 months because they kicked off in May, they would owe the EU, or from the EU, about 2 million euros more than what they paid Apple in 30% fees. That's insane. And this is all going off of 30% fees because it's year one for their subscriptions. So come year two, it's going to drop to a half. And that's right now. I ran the numbers for a whole bunch of other apps, including some popular games, and they would not owe more money in year one. But considering that this will include all of the users acquired in year one in year two, in addition to year two users, now we're starting to stack costs, and this will slowly grow and grow and grow, especially for apps that are growing. So, wow. So what's your take on the core technology fee? What does this mean for the industry? You've seen it evolve over the years.
So let's imagine a universe in which everybody does this. Everybody goes to an alternative app marketplace and pays the core technology fee, 50 euro cents for each annual install. Well, let's say you have a moderately viral game, 10 million downloads, you're talking over 400,000 euros a month. Maybe you have a successful hyper casual, 3 million installs, 90,000 euros per month. What that would do in this alternate reality that we're talking about, if everybody moves this direction, it immediately kills freemium. It immediately kills freemium, right? And ad supported hyper casual, forget about it. Forget about it. Not possible, and actively dangerous. The example I thought of was, you remember Flappy Bird? It's got to be a decade ago now, right? You know, some random developer in Vietnam built something, it just goes viral, goes up, and he's making 50,000 US a week, I believe, or maybe even a day. I forget which it was. It's so much that he's freaked out, and he eventually shuts it down. But he would be in the red instantly with his download count. So that's the alternate reality where everybody chooses this. The real reality, that'll probably get changed somewhat because the EU is going to have something to say. Spotify might mount a Epic-like legal challenge, as well as some backdoor maneuvering and others as well. So we'll see what happens there. But Apple is very clearly telling everybody, stay on the App Store.
Absolutely.
You don't know how good you have it. Stay here. We're actually reducing some of the fees. Stick around. It's better. It's easier. It's safer. A lot of other things. And you're going to make more money.
Yep. I think you hit the nail on the head. I want to find the person who in the meeting came up with this idea. I want to shake their hand and say you're a revolutionary. I don't love this at all, but just thinking outside the box like this is interesting. And I think it's interesting on a variety of reasons. I think the idea of charging per install and also per update. So basically, every transaction between a device, your device, Apple's device technically, and a store, regardless of which store, earns Apple some money. That's really smart, and that's a really smart way to discourage people from ever leaving and going with this other alternative, which, and that's I think also another side to this. If developers don't go for the new business terms, those third-party app marketplaces are not going to have content. And I think it's going to be an uphill battle to get discovery for them anyway. So now you're choking the supply. There's not going to be any demand. So from a user perspective, if my mom is thinking about this, she's never going outside of the App Store. If you're trying to cater to whatever my mom uses on her phone, why would you go outside the App Store? And that's how the App Store remains the only source.
That is a great point. And I'm just going to take off my industry hat. I'm going to take off, all that stuff, and I'm going to just put on my user hat. Am I going to go on a third-party app marketplace? No. Why on earth would I do that? Giving my credit card and a lot of personal information about myself to 15 different app marketplaces, or maybe actually not that. Maybe I'm using that marketplace, but I'm giving it to 15 different apps or services. Just increases my threat footprint to get hacked and to get scammed. Now I know there's one place where all my info is. I know that it's pretty safe. I know that it's simple. I don't have to think about it. I get one bill. I can track that. It's pretty simple. It's pretty easy. So it would be really hard to move me off of there. Now there are ways, and this is not to say that developers are stuck just completely paying exactly what Apple has done, because we have examples right now outside the EU. Forget the Digital Markets Act, forget this new app marketplaces, third-party app marketplaces, who are simply selling online. And there's multiple ways of doing that, right? So let's say you're a casino app, and well, you have a web presence. All of a sudden, you're multi-platform. All of a sudden, you can slide little hints to people. Hey, check out what we have on the web. Special deal. There's a coin drop or something like that, and they go there and then they say, hey, you can actually buy your stuff here.
Yep.
And you can figure out ways of doing that in a lot of different spaces. It's harder for some apps to go multi-platform. Let's say you're a mid-core game or something like that. How do you go multi-platform in a way that is free from platform taxes? But there are ways to do that, and there's existing solutions to make that easier for you to do that as well. So I think that if you're a big publisher or developer, you don't even really need this, and this adds additional risk to whatever you're doing. You probably don't even look at it too hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said something very interesting. It's the from a user perspective, it's the risk, and maybe it's not an immediate word that comes to mind for most people, but it is risky, especially today with everything that's happening with cybersecurity. And my information has been leaked so many times. My bank stopped notifying me. It sends so many push notifications, and eventually it was like, okay, who cares anymore? Everyone knows who you are. My phone rings off the hook all the time, people trying to sell me stuff. So I'm just used to it. I don't want to continue doing that. But at the same time, I think the other side of it, well, the side of it is that how would you even find these games? How would you even find these apps if you were to start from the web? That creates a whole layer of, wait, do we even need this? What are we trying to save here? And the whole argument, and this might be a controversial opinion, but the whole argument of 30/15 versus something else becomes moot, because if you can't find my app, does it really matter how much it costs me for me to earn $1 from you? I'm going to earn zero. Zero multiplied by anything is just zero. So that's been my opinion for a long time, and I think this doesn't really change that, because even though it makes it open for others to establish these marketplaces, I don't really see how they're going to gain traffic. But that's also an interesting thing I wanted to bring up. Who is going to open these marketplaces? So we know Epic will definitely have a marketplace because They've been the cheerleader for all this, and they absolutely must. But if we think about the fees, they're going to have to pay the technology fee once when people download their app, their marketplace app, from the App Store. And then because they're going to have their own games, they're going to have to pay another fee for every download. So they're paying $1 basically, or €1 for every download from their store. And it gets a little bit different if someone downloads multiple games, but let's just keep it at Fortnite because that's what everyone wants. So if I want Fortnite, Epic has to pay Apple a whole euro every time I download it. And if I continue to update it in a year, they're going to have to pay them again another half. And so why would anyone do this? Or who would do this? Who is this for? I can't come up with a good answer.
Epic will not do this under these terms. Epic will challenge this.
Of
And I
course.
think others will also challenge this, and they will try and get better terms. But there's something that Apple did recently, in fact, a couple days before this announcement came out, and they announced that they're supporting streaming game services.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. Now, put that side by side with what you just said. Every update, half a euro. Every update, half a euro for over the course of a 12-month period.
Mm-hmm.
What if this change in business terms creates a change in the types of apps people create?
Mm-hmm.
What if my app just becomes a bit of a shell that I almost never
Yeah.
have to update?
Yes.
And I just stream everything through that shell.
Mm-hmm.
And what if this is Apple's worst nightmare? Because when my app is an actual app with code, with content, and other things that are embedded in it in a software package that Apple can actually look at and check and evaluate before approving and allowing on the App Store, if that changes in my app is just a shell and I stream whatever the heck I want into
Mm-hmm.
it, Apple has lost control.
Yes. Will Apple allow
That's
this?
interesting.
They can't allow this.
Apple literally did allow it. The streaming game services is now live. You can
But
submit a single app that streams all your games, and you can do mini apps as well
mm-hmm.
inside there. So very interesting.
But then at the same time, now every app. Oh, okay. So we're going back to the bad, I think, part of this. Every app, because in order to submit an app to any of the stores, you have to go through App Store Connect. And App Store Connect will be the gatekeeper for what's going in and what's allowed to continue on. And the whole idea is you upload your app, your binary to App Store Connect, just as you would normally, and you tell them where you want to send this. They sign it for that particular marketplace to give you back a package that you then give to the third party, which is convoluted. They did say there are APIs coming to automate all this, and I believe that's going to happen. Probably not immediately because they want to add as much friction as possible, but let's say in a year all this will be there. You still have to go through Apple, and Apple will have some sort of an app review process. They said that it's half automated, half with people. It's going to be probably a lighter version. So at some point they can say, "Oh, we're seeing you're not providing updates. We can't allow this to happen. You should provide updates to your users." And you can counter and say, "But well, I'm streaming them." They'll say, "Well, your app is not a game." So let's say games will get away with it. Your app is not a game. You can't stream those things. What do you do then? You're kind of locked out now of everything, because if you're locked out of App Store Connect, you're locked out of infinity marketplaces. So I think that's going to be really tricky. And I think Apple may have shot themselves in the foot a little bit by doing this, just because putting the fee on updates in order to seem mean and harsh, because that's just going to disincentivize developers from providing good apps. And I see the argument for streaming, but imagine how many developers won't use a third party to do this, are too small, and they still pass 1 million, so they still owe money. I think that's going to be really, really difficult.
You're absolutely right. And of course, this is going to be a battle. It's like a Cold War, right? Sometimes it erupts and it becomes a bit of a hot war. And one side does one thing and the other side does another thing. And then something changes and everybody finds a crack.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and this will continue. But as we chatted about before, this is Apple's initial response to the DMA.
Yep.
There's going to be some pushback, and Apple will have anticipated this. So they will have built in some things into this proposal, in my opinion,
Yeah.
that they are willing to let go of. And perhaps this update thing, this in perpetuity, is one of them. Perhaps
Yeah.
other components are. Who knows exactly? But they'll have some initial position and probably some fallback position, because I can't imagine legally, probably by the letter of the law, they're doing what the DMA is requiring, or at least some lawyers can argue that that's
Yeah.
correct. But by the spirit of the DMA, probably not.
Not at all. It's hilarious that someone would think that this can pass for the law. There are a few
Yeah.
questions in the chat I wanted to bring up before we continue. So the first question is this going to happen to everyone or just the EU? And I just want to be clear, this is only for developers based in the EU. The EU does not have the ability to control stuff in the US. And so if you're based in the US, none of this matters. You have to be in the EU for this.
Even if you ship apps to the EU?
From what I could tell, yes, but there is always the possibility of opening an office in the EU and then having a binary specifically for the EU, and then you could be in all of these marketplaces in theory. And I bet you we're going to see companies who offer their storefront as a company office for everyone.
Interesting.
But I think the requirement or the limitations that it presents in essence are mainly focused on the EU. So if you're US based, you don't have to do anything. Everything will be the same. If you're in the EU, then you have this choice. And also this is a choice. So Apple said, keep the 15% or 30% and the current terms or switch over to these new terms. Totally up to you. So if you know that you're not going to have more than 1 million downloads because your app is small, you could switch to these with no repercussions. Now, at least, maybe in the future, or if your app gets viral, which is a disincentive to be successful. But you can't switch back. So once you go with the new business terms, there's no going back on this. I think that's another reason why I wanted to have this live stream, to make sure everyone knows what's
That's
happening.
so high pressure.
So you don't have to make this decision now, but you have to make this decision. And I think that's a bad thing. An absolute bad thing. There are more questions. Let's see. For small developers, Nathan is saying, for small developers and open source projects, that will be so bad. And I completely agree. Why would anyone put a free app on the new business terms? You have to pay for something you're not getting. You're not making any money. There's really no reason to do that. I think the million count is probably a number that Apple does everything off of data from everything that I've seen, including the small business program and everything else. So they know that 1 million is probably enough to get enough people that the number looks high. And they said 99% of developers, and that sounds high. But there are many, many, many millions of developers. So that number is, whatever is left is still high. And because this is in perpetuity, eventually more developers will get there. But that could also be a hint that they may drop this, if the perpetuity part, as part of the negotiations.
Yeah, and we chatted about this beforehand, right? Apple says 99% of developers won't ever hit that. And that's true. And that's 100% the case. And as somebody who fits in that 99%, the reality is we don't matter. Okay. And there's some caveats there. There's some apps that are just internal. It's like 10,000 people need them, and there you go. And that's perfect, and it's good, and it's high value. And so I don't mean that in a really awful sense. But the developers and publishers that matter are the ones that have tens, hundreds, billions of installs, right? And that's where the money is. That's where everything happens, and that's who this is going to hit.
Absolutely. More from the chat. So Christoph is correcting me and saying that this is for all apps published in the EU. Developer base doesn't matter.
That's what my thought was as well. Doesn't matter where you're based. If you're publishing in the EU, I think you're under EU rules.
So as long as you're, and that might require that you have a different binary in that case.
Exactly.
And then you're in trouble.
What? And then you're in trouble. And guess what? So the EU is doing this. We know legislation is slowly changing in the US thanks to Epic and others, and maybe even eventually some kind of national legislation. We'll find out. We know Korea's been doing some stuff. We know Taiwan's, Netherlands, well, that's part of the EU. But this is not going to end with the EU.
Yep.
This is going to be something that's going to happen globally. And can you have you said it earlier, can you have a per country or per region policy for everything? Eventually, Apple and Google are going to have to make some decisions and choices about how they operate that's going to work across the globe.
I think it's going to be tough right now. It's going to be tough in a year, and it's going to be tough once it actually rolls out to the entire world, because now we also have these two systems. We have the current system, we have the new system, and you as a developer need to choose. But what if Apple takes away that choice? So this rolls out to all the countries, and that's just the new reality. As a developer, now you're faced with a lot of challenges. So on the one hand, you have the freedom of choice, freedom and choice in quotes, of course, but you also have reporting requirements, payment requirements. Apple is going to send you an invoice. Just imagine getting an invoice from Apple in the mail. That's bizarre to me. So that's going to be
Are they
very
actually
challenging.
sending you an invoice or do you have to report? So what I read is you have to report. And I was like, okay, who's going to do that? Who's going to do that on time? Is Apple going
Hmm.
to audit that? Now, since you're on iOS, theoretically, Apple could still see what's happening in your app,
Hmm.
especially since they've notarized your app and
Yeah.
since you've uploaded it via Apple's own services.
Hmm.
So I'm a little hazy on that right now.
So from everything I read, I believe the reporting requirements have to do with the other thing that Apple did a few weeks ago for the US, where you can send people to a website to pay for your app, and then you have to then report to Apple, and then they can audit you. This, they will have an API that marshals the app, meaning that brings the app from the third-party app store, the app that they signed, that you gave to the marketplace, bring it into the user's device. That will report to Apple that you had to download, and they're coming out with a whole bunch of new reports that will show you your first annual downloads and how many of those are actually counting for a fee. So all those
Yeah.
reports are claimed to be being built and will be available in March, which means Apple will know exactly how many downloads you have, and they claim they will invoice you on the first of the month, and you have until the 15th, I believe, to pay them. I don't want to know what happens if you don't pay them. I imagine all of your apps just disappear, kind of mafia style, and that's kind of scary. I mean, it makes sense. That's how I would build this if I had to build a building system, but still kind of scary.
This is quite insane because, as everybody who's published an app knows, there's a significant gap between the time that you get an install and that it's monetized,
Hmm.
especially monetized to the degree that compensates you for your ad costs and everything else, right?
Hmm.
And your LTV, I mean, you might not get full payback for 90 days, for 180 days, for longer, depending on what kind of game you had, what kind of costs you had, right?
Yep.
Now you got this extra fee, which you got to pay instantly.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a ball crusher.
Yeah. I think that's a mild way of saying it. And the way Apple is calculating this fee is once you pass 1 million downloads, they're going to see how many more downloads you had, then take that, multiply that by a half, and then, or 50 cents, 50 euro cents in this case, and then divide it by 12. So you're paying a 12th of that because that's going to go on for a whole year. So in the beginning, for an app that's not growing super fast, you're not ChatGPT, it might be, 500 euros, 1,000 euros. But then because it continues and accumulates, you'll end up with the 15,000 euros by the end of the year. And what do you do at that point? You're kind of stuck. So I think that's the kind of thing that is super important for people to know from day one. And we'll probably come up with some sort of a sheet with all the big apps and how much money they would pay over time, just to give context for this. And I think that second year is going to be the killer. That's going to be the real crusher, the shredder.
There are literally only two choices that I see right now for apps and app developers and publishers. One is stay on the App Store,
Hmm.
keep life simple.
Yeah.
Don't have to build a lot of extra stuff, don't have to do a lot of extra accounting, and you've massively de-risked from using this third-party app marketplace or third-party payments because that's a huge risk factor going forward. The second option is to do as many big apps and publishers already do. So there are some huge names out there. We're talking the biggest publishers in the world. One of them, 25% of their total revenue is running direct to consumer on a web store. Another, only 8%. They've just started. Another, and I'm not naming names right now because I don't want to get in trouble. Another 30% of their revenue is D2C. And I'm talking names that you would know, games that you play, all that stuff, right? And so there are ways of doing that that are relatively safe, becoming a multi-platform publisher. right?
Yeah.
And how do you define exactly what multi-platform, and are all the features on one platform in another platform? You can have those debates, and you can have some lawyers get involved and figure it out. If you're big enough to think about it, then you've got to do some strategic work. Will it be worth it for us long term?
Yeah.
If you're not, and you're worried about it, stay on the App Store, pay the fees, and keep life simple.
Yeah. I think that's really what it is. And one is maybe a 1% and one is a 99%. But to your point with going multi-platform, there is one caveat to that because technology-wise, it's getting a lot easier to have that sort of web presence without being a web developer, without having to spend time writing PHP scripts these days. I come from yeah, I'm old. But I think the real challenge that you have with that is how are you going to get found? So if you're completely off the App Store, or if you're trying to offload all of your revenue to the web in order to save some sort of money, then you could, and you have the presence, great. So Epic can do that, and probably Tinder can do that, and all the games that we're thinking of, Rovio's entire portfolio can do that because they have that sort of presence and brand recognition and the ability to acquire users at scale. Not many other games actually do. And I think that's going to be another differentiator between I'm going to go multi platform versus I need my users from the App Store because that's how I exist.
Yeah, the lots to unpack in what you just said, right? And there's definitely a level at which you consider this, and a level beneath which you do not, because you need the discovery. Now, for in terms of discovery, every case we just talked about in the last 5 minutes, everyone is still on the App Store, everyone's still on
Yeah.
Google Play. But as you say, if there's less revenue flowing through that Apple sees, that Google sees, that can have an impact in your ranking. That can have an impact in where you sit in searches and organic discovery and all that
Hmm.
stuff, right? So that does matter. But there's a level beneath which you should not consider this, and you just go all in on the platform and build and grow. And you know what? If you can benefit because there's some even quasi competition and fees are reduced, hey, awesome, wonderful.
Yeah.
When you get to a certain point and you are not just a mobile game anymore, you are a brand,
Hmm.
and you have a community, and there's a subreddit about you and all that
Yeah.
stuff, right? Then you start having these types of considerations.
Yeah, and I think that really makes a lot of sense, especially because we know that most of these will start out as some sort of a free or freemium, and we know the high cost of going not multi-platform but outside the App Store using Apple's new business terms. There are a couple more good things from the chat, and one bigger question. So Marcus is saying, I can already think of the Black Hat strategies developers would try to pull with paid bot downloads on their competitors. And I mean, I don't really have any good response to that. Yes, I see that.
I will bankrupt my competitor
Yeah,
by advertising their app because
yeah.
I know the terms that they've done. Wow. Hey, just cleared the playing field. Genius. Evil genius, but
Evil
genius.
genius. There's a lot of evil inside of all of this. A lot of evil. Evil genius. Little Doctor Evil stroking a cat. But this does say something about, even if not Black Hat, there's this big disincentive to succeed with a free app. So our free apps are going to die under this model, and everyone will have to become a subscription, because if you're not a subscription, you're not going to be able to pay for year two. That could mean a substantial shift in what the App Store feels like and how users interact with it. And that might also decrease demand in general, because if everything you download has to be paid, we're back to 2011 without the
Yep.
excitement.
Yep. And there's a world in which, as we said right off the top, this makes perfect sense and you could make more money. So let's say you're a high value subscription
Hmm.
already
Yeah.
and you have a brand already, right? Maybe you're in education, maybe it's mental health, maybe it's a fitness subscription or something like that. And some of those subscriptions are $100 a year, $50 a year, $300 a year, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
You could potentially make more money here. There's some challenges to do in and around it. All of a sudden, your users are truly your customers. You have to
Hmm.
manage a lot of stuff, refunds, hassles, all that stuff. You got to figure stuff out, currencies, and there's some apps for that, and there's some platforms for that, but maybe it's not all quite as neat and tidy as just being on the App Store or Google
Hmm.
Play, right? But there is a world in which there are certain apps make more money here. The question is, and we keep coming back to this, are you okay with what you have right now?
Hmm.
And are you okay with stunting future discovery and stunting future growth because you're harder to find?
Yep.
Maybe you're big enough and the snowball is rolling downhill and you feel like you have enough momentum. I mean, that's possible. For many, maybe not so much.
Yeah. I think that's, and how you defined what is many in this case, I think that's going to be a little bit challenging. And I hope most developers who, before they accept these new terms, if these new terms happen and they do end up being this, will actually think about the long term and look at their numbers and try to figure out, okay, what does this mean for me? And to add to your point, Adir in the chat add that another risk is that if you split your downloads between different stores, we know that downloads affect ASO kind of indirectly through ratings, and so those are going to drop. So you're really hurting yourself on the App Store, the place that has all of the discovery and all of the moms. And instead, you're trying to spread all those downloads in order to, I don't even know what you would save at that point. But also, another question is, would Apple penalize you for being on a third party App Store marketplace by not featuring you on the App Store, by dropping your ranks in ASO, by who knows what else? And obviously, they're not going to say that, but I've seen things, so I'm not going to rule that out. Not flat out, at least.
Maybe they'll feature you even more because they'll make more money off you. I don't know.
Maybe they'll run the numbers, and if it is more advantageous for them, they'll kick it out. It's very possible. It's kind of absurd, but it is very possible. But that brings me back to the same question I've been wrestling with for the last week, and that is, who would open a marketplace? And there was a question in the chat from Nathan, who's asking if we think that Google or Amazon will launch their Google Play on Apple or their Amazon App Store on Apple because now that's possible. What do you think?
I don't think they will under these terms, except potentially as a test,
Yeah.
a sandbox. Um, I can see that to just start learning, but I don't see these terms lasting
Hmm.
as long as the previous reality in iOS has lasted. I believe we'll see legislation that some of these terms will have to change, not all of them. If we look at what iOS has always been built as an appliance. iOS has always been built
Hmm.
to kind of counteract the history of computer technology, personal computer technology, to be anything can come in, viruses can come in, scammers can come in, all kinds of stuff, to be a protected area. That's being cracked open slightly, not entirely. Apple's still going to check those new apps that are coming on in third-party marketplaces. I think it's going to crack open more. I think
Hmm.
that the regulators will require that in various countries around the world, especially those that maybe don't like big American tech companies as much. I mean, the DMA was crafted to hit American tech companies. Let's just be honest about that, right?
Yep.
I mean, the limits that they set were, there is one company that has gatekeeper status that is not American. I believe, and I believe it's Chinese. I believe there's not a single European company that meets the criteria for gatekeeper status under the DMA. So yeah, I don't think that you're going to see huge amounts of marketplaces pop up under these terms. I think the terms will change. I think eventually you will see. And then you'll see Microsoft do it. You'll
Hmm.
see Amazon do it. You'll see big publishers do their own app store, Epic, of course, all that stuff. But under these terms, it's kind of financial suicide to invest in it.
Well said. Financial suicide for most, definitely for most. And because the terms are so undefined, and not undefined as in Apple didn't define them, but undefined as in they may not last more than the next few weeks, I think saying yes to this right now is, like you said, it is suicide for your business in the short term or the long term, depends on who you are. I dropped a poll in the chat just to see if people are, if there's anyone who is excited about this, and I asked, would you switch to the new business terms? And there's a yes and a no, and it's 100% no at the moment. So Go and vote just to make sure that I explained that we did a good job explaining what these business terms are. And if you have any questions, just drop them in. But also, if you haven't already, give this live stream a like. We're on YouTube and we're playing for the algorithm. And the more likes we have, the more YouTube will like us. And we kind of like that. That's good for business. So please take a moment, hit that like button. It's somewhere here. Here, maybe. I don't really know. I can't see myself. So, yeah, continuing. So I think it's the idea that Apple would allow a Google Play to exist on iOS is not that crazy to me. It's not crazy. We'll put it this way. The other question is what's the benefit? What's the value of Google Play, which is full of Android apps existing on iOS with iOS apps? I don't see it, especially not at these prices, but I really don't see it. You can say that, and this is my argument for who would actually do this. A third party that wants to certify what's in its app store. So if I'm a big, well-known brand and I have maybe a few apps under me or apps that are made by third parties for my, let's say, appliance. If I am Fender Guitars and I'm allowing third-party developers to make effects on the iPhone, and let's say the iPhone is strong enough to run good effects, and we're not going to get into the craziness of analog effects versus digital. Let's say digital is fine. I want to be able to certify that everything that's downloaded from my app store meets my sort of standards. I can't really do that on the app store. I would have to chase down all the knockoffs and all the competitors. On my app store, I can easily do that. And for that use case, I can kind of see it. So Fender says, go download the Fender Digital Effects Store. And in that store, everything is certified. We went through everything. We know that it's going to work with your Fender amp or Fender anything. But that's such a tiny use case.
And you can actually do that with mini apps now that Apple has allowed that. And so that you could say, hey, those are mini apps. They're on the Fender app. And anything that's outside the Fender app is not approved, not guaranteed to work. You see, essentially, you can run your own app marketplace, mini app marketplace inside your own app now. And I think that would just work, and that would be a more elegant solution. So I look forward to seeing over the next months, and this is something that will take quarters and years, right?
Yeah,
We're
absolutely.
talking massive policy. We're talking legislators, governments. None of this moves courts. None of this moves quickly,
Very
right? So
slowly.
this is exactly. There's an opening salvo of the DMA. How many years ago was that? Is that 2 years ago? Something like that,
A
right?
little bit more, I think.
Here's the maybe 3. Here's the response from Apple, right? We're going to have some comeback. We'll see where things end up. What we do know is we live in interesting times.
Absolutely interesting times. I think everything that's happening now, even if it doesn't end up going into effect come March 1st, will be the beginning of what will come into effect whenever that happens. So we will see a future in which there are marketplaces, there are mini marts on the App Store, and there are ways to acquire more apps. And from a developer standpoint, I think that's awful. I think that it's going to be so difficult to get visibility. And if you look at what's happening in China, China is kind of like that because Android doesn't really need any sort of approvals. You can just open your own app marketplace. And at some point, there were 30 marketplaces or app stores or however you want to call them. And I think that was really awful for developers because you can't really go and submit your app to 30 marketplaces. If you're Rovio, of course, you have enough teams and enough interns. If you're a Joe Schmo and you're working with 2 of your friends or 3 of your friends, it may be very difficult. And you look at localizations, for example, on the App Store, just localizing your app into multiple languages is a huge barrier for some companies, not even individuals. So if you need to now spread all of that effort across, let's say, even 10 marketplaces, and those marketplaces don't have that sort of traffic, I think by default, strategy-wise, strategically, don't waste your time. Just stay on the App Store where all the moms are. That's, I think, ultimately what it is. What does that mean, though, for this? Does it mean that eventually just the whole idea will be abandoned because just no one's going to do it? Or will companies like Epic and others just champion this so much they'll will it into existence?
There's a ton to look at here. So if you look at China as an example, I looked at that. It's got to be a year ago or something like that. Sure, there's 30, 40, 50 different app marketplaces for Android. 10 kind of matter. 2
At
or
this point,
3,
yeah.
maybe or are the giants, right? So as a developer, as a publisher, A, it's pretty easy to pick, the real winners, and B, you know what, this is a business opportunity. Maybe you're an app store optimization company and you decide, okay, you know what, I'm also going to build in some capability to upload this binary
Mm-hmm.
to 50 different
True.
app marketplaces and then manage it all centrally and just give me everything you got and I'll just handle it, right? And so there's this layer that'll come in and just manage it for people. I imagine that it already exists to some degree in China, and if the future that we envision on iOS happens globally and Android happens globally, there'll be those business opportunities there. The other thing is that this is a really interesting thing because for some reason, let's say you're a developer and you just can't make it on the App Store for
Hmm.
whatever reason, it's just not working for you. Maybe you try and you find some success elsewhere and you establish a beachhead and then you expand from there. So
Hmm.
I think overall there are opportunities. I think overall there are good things. But in terms of consolidation, this is a technology industry. What does
Hmm.
the technology industry do? It consolidates
Yeah.
around solutions. There's the winner who gets 80%, and then there's the 20% that others, squabble over,
Yep.
right? That's just the nature of the beast. It's like the fax network. It's like SMS. It's, consolidation happens in technology. So yeah, there's always only going to be a small number of big players, but I think it can be more than one.
Yeah, I agree. I think where it will make sense, or when it will make sense, it will become one. And China did go through 1 to 30, and now it's down to that core of they have the millions. And would we see that on the App Store? Probably. I don't see any reason not to. I mean, that's just evolution, and that's the idea behind open markets, supply and demand, and that's just how it works. The only question is how long is that going to take? And in the middle, is that core technology fee going to bankrupt some of these companies who are trying to find that initial success? And that's where that million, I think the free million comes in. And we'll see if that was the magic number. If that is the magic number, yes, the opportunity is great. If it's a little bit below the magic number, the opportunity becomes very challenging. So I don't really see any crazy reasons to do this now, but it could be in a year.
I think we will see, just to reference one point that you made, I think we will have some examples, if this proceeds as outlined, of some developers and publishers who do go bankrupt. And
Hmm.
we'll have those stories. I chose wrong. I had to pay this core
Yeah.
technology fee. I bankrupted myself. There you go. We might also see some who say, you know what? This is a lifestyle business. I'm not trying to get massive. I'm hitting
Hmm.
999,000 downloads, and I'm cutting. And how do you cut it off? I don't know. Is there a cutoff valve? Is there a way to shut
Yeah.
this app is no longer available for downloads, just for updates, right?
Yeah.
Until you get some attrition, and then you can add a few more. That's got to be a thing, right?
That's
Maybe
a
I only ever
valid
want to
point.
stay down here.
That
Yeah.
that is a very valid point. I didn't really consider this. Do you want to like an antiviral switch? Like, don't put me on TikTok. I do not want your business. Go away. I have 999,999. Please go away. Um, why not? I mean, you can probably. No, you can't do that on your own. It has to come from Apple directly. You can take your app
Hmm.
off the store. That's a real thing.
That's the only way you could do it right now.
Yeah.
Absolutely remove your app from the store. But then, of course, there's no support for anybody, and
Yeah.
how would payments happen? All this nonsense. So there's stuff to be figured out. There's whole cans of apples, barrels of apples we have not unearthed yet.
Barrels of apples. That's going to be the cover for my next video on this. Barrels of apples, just someone wheeling them. But wow, yeah, there's so much more we can talk about. We're coming up on our hour of talking, and I like to keep these to an hour. So to summarize what we've talked about today, there's good in Apple's new business terms, new marketplaces, the possibility of more discovery, the possibility, as you said, of smaller marketplaces that can help smaller apps grow up. I kind of like that idea. But at the same time, there is also the suicide, the financial suicide aspect of this, if that core technology fee remains as it is now and also remains um, in perpetuity, which I think that is the evil side of it. And that's also the ugly side of it, that this perpetuity means that apps that go through any of these new third parties or the App Store now owe Apple a royalty forever and ever. Well, yearly forever and ever. I think that's going to be it's going to be interesting to see this evolve. How would you summarize all of this? from your perspective?
Interesting is a very small word for what we're going to see. I do believe we will have a future that is interesting and exciting in a lot of different ways with multiple app marketplaces that you can just grab and install and apps you can get from multiple places. I think it's a total battle to get there. And I think that it's probably the better part of 5 years before something like that actually exists. As it stands right now, let the big boys and girls fight it out, play with it, figure it out, and evolve as an indie, as somebody who's growing, as somebody who has a nice business. Just keep your nose to the grindstone, keep building, keep growing, keep doing what you do, and eventually, I think the world will expand. I mean, look,
Yeah.
this is a computer.
Hmm.
Just because I can put it in my pocket doesn't mean it's not a computer, right? And you've got to be able to find ways to access that. The DMA has forced Apple to open it up somewhat. That includes stuff we haven't talked about, right?
Hmm.
APIs for NFC payments and stuff like that in the EU. Third-party identity solutions, right? The streaming game stuff that we talked about, the mini apps we talked about. There's new measurement options,
Hmm.
ad attribution kit, right? Which we got to dig into at some point as well. All this is vastly changing. And all this is happening while the biggest iOS release ever. So this is the biggest change to the
Hmm.
iOS ecosystem, but the biggest iOS release ever is coming, and that's
Hmm.
iOS 18. And that's where Apple is going to try and put GPT-4 and all sorts of
Yeah.
smart AI stuff to make Siri actually work. Actually relevant. That's going to be a real big deal. And it's in this evolving ecosystem where Apple Vision Pro is coming as well, right? Where,
Hmm.
everything is changing. So we live in wonderful times.
Yeah, I think this is probably going to be the biggest year for the App Store. And I've said that multiple times in the past, but subscriptions, well, in-app purchases to begin with. And now we're looking at really all the things, a new device, changes to the iPhone operating system, a whole new potential business side to things. And we're not even talking about app tracking transparency and what's changing with that. We're not talking about any of those things. So, yeah, definitely interesting. We got to find a bigger word than interesting. I'll look it up later and then post it. There's got to be
I
something.
got to give a quote here. I got to give a quote here, and the quote is: someone said this. There are decades where nothing happens, and then minutes where everything happens. Right, and we're kind of in one of those minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely one of those minutes. John,
Yeah.
thank you for joining. This was extremely insightful for me, even. I don't know how to do this.
And now I've defocused my camera. That's why you don't do that.
Yeah, I have a single focus. It works very, very well for me. But yeah,
All right,
again,
it's been a pleasure.
thank you for joining us. I think we just barely began to scratch the surface, but hopefully you as a viewers like this and it was insightful and you learned something new today. And 12% of you have said you will switch to the new term. So I'm hoping you are the I know, big companies who are making enough money for this not to be a problem, and you'll actually benefit from this. And I'm looking forward to seeing all these third-party app marketplaces and how we can help them as an analytics provider. But that's a secret for later. So that's pretty much it. If our viewers want to ask you questions or find you, how can they find you online?
I'm impossible to find. I'm nowhere.
Really? Not at all. I've never seen you online, not even once.
LinkedIn is a good place to connect, but yeah, I'm not checking those messages all the time. Twitter, sort of. I guess it's X now. Threads, I'm there as well. Yeah, I'm everywhere digital is.
Cool, and we'll link to those things. You can also find me. I'm on Twitter/X. I call it Twitter because that's what it is to me, and will
It
forever be.
is.
So I'm on that for now. If you need me, you'll know where to find me. We'll drop all of our contact info in case you have more questions. If you have any other questions, ask them in the comments and I'll go back and answer them. I promised to do that for last week's live stream, and I've not done that yet because I was putting together this live stream kind of in a hurry. But I will do that. I promise. Again, thank you, John. Thank you for everyone else viewing. And I will be talking a lot more about this. I think there's a lot more to unpack here in the future. So stay tuned and subscribe to the channel for more. Alrighty. Bye-bye, everyone.